Here we are again, and the Utah Jazz are in new waters, similar to what they were at the end of last year after the trade deadline when they emptied out the reserves, and this year it stung a little bit harder. Thanks for tuning in to another video. It's your boy Wraith Hoops. Make sure to like this one, subscribe, and turn on post notifications if you like the Utah Jazz. Today we're going to be talking about where they go from here. That being said, let's go ahead and get into this one. Obviously, my most recent video was a little bit rantish, and I had quite the few opinions regarding exactly what was going on with the Utah Jazz organization and how I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of the decisions that were made at the trade deadline, though I understood ultimately what the end goal is. This is a team that is supposed to be gearing towards contention, and Danny Ainge plans on doing it mostly through the draft, bar any surprising outcomes from other star players in the league that might want to join the ranks of the Utah Jazz, which is few and far in between. You know, the most recent one that comes to mind is probably like a Carlos Boozer, and even at that point, Carlos Boozer was never really viewed as a top 10 player in the league, so you know how that goes. All the same, I feel like it makes the most sense that Danny Ainge did do what needed to be done. It hurts. It definitely does. You could argue that Ochai wasn't putting up the necessarily best second-year numbers that we would have hoped he could have. Also, Kelly Olynyk was one of the oldest guys that could have been on a contender in today's game. And while his plays actually helped facilitate the second unit and put them in positions to score and win ball games for us, ultimately it wasn't a sustainable thing, and by the time there was a championship contending roster built around it, he would probably be at the tail end of his career. So it made the most sense to trade him away. It was nice that they were able to go ahead and send him away to the Toronto Raptors nevertheless, because he is a Canadian man at the end of the day. And I'm sure that Ochai will find a way to be useful in Masai's systems, because Darko, as the new head coach over there, they're known to love lanky wings that have the ability to handle the ball and do a different multitude of things. Hence why Scottie Barnes is such a phenomenal talent over there, and obviously they traded away Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, but those were two key pieces as well for that roster. As they rebuild, I expect them to continue on with their trends, and ultimately it will end up being very beneficial for them. The Utah Jazz have to take a little bit of a different approach. While they are also in a rebuild of their own, they continually kind of hit the reset button. And it can be a little bit frustrating, especially for players on the team, as I detailed in my previous video, but it is a necessity that they go ahead and go through these growing pains, because ultimately you want to find yourself in a situation where you are capable of taking that next step, but by leaps and bounds. And right now the roster, as previously constructed, was not able to. So do I think they'll still end up being a play-in team? I think they still have that capability. The most key pieces of the team were not touched. You still have Walker Kessler, you still have Lauri Markkanen, you still have Colin Sexton, so your scoring duo is still there. You still have Chris Dunn to facilitate. And of course you have Keontae George still developing on the bench. He's been playing a little bit better recently, but he also had a little bit of a stinker in the most recent game. At the same time, you also have Jordan Clarkson still, who's going to be inconsistent, but he'll have his good games here and there. And now you have the opportunity to play Taylor Hendricks. I'm very high on Taylor Hendricks for those that don't know, and I believe that not only does he have the length, range, and physical body to do great things, I also think that his mind is in the right place, considering that he's a terrific help defender, and he doesn't always need to be in the play to affect the play. Lowry is obviously going to be understandably frustrated. He said in previous interviews last year after the trade deadline, he was unhappy because it puts you in a situation where you understand and certain decisions have to be put in the GM's hands and he has to make the tough ones. Credit to Danny Ainge for being willing to be the villain on multiple occasions, and he has been known to build playoff teams. Admittedly, under his tenure, he's only gotten one ring, but nevertheless, you could look at the current Celtics and see that they're continually listed as contenders. So to a certain extent, that accounts in my opinion, also understanding that they've been to the finals more than once. I don't see a world where that roster was a contender. I think we all understood that. But it was still nice to see the team win games when previously the over-under for this roster was effectively like 25 games coming into this year. All analysts counted them out. Nobody thought they were going to be beyond, I believe, the 13th or 12th spot in the Western Conference. Admittedly, the Western Conference is pretty packed and there's a lot of powerhouse teams, so much so that you see teams like the Lakers and the Warriors on the outside looking in, trying to fight their way into the play-in, and then try and get back into the playoff picture and have a secured seat to where they don't have to play in the play-in. Naturally, I feel as though this team deserved a little bit more. They deserve to play this year out. But I also understand where Danny Ainge is coming from. And by trading away those guys, getting a late first round pick, which is really a second round pick in my opinion, and then getting an actual second round pick, along with a bunch of expiring contracts for people that you're not going to want to pay, and then also them waiving Kevin Knox literally within 48 hours of getting him, it made sense that they were going to go ahead and just take this pathway. Now you're going to have a lot of extra money to work with off the books. You're going to be able to re-sign. You're going to be able to extend Lowry's contract. You're going to be able to re-sign Dunn for some comfortable money. I'm sure he won't be too expensive, but he is a quality player and he should be paid as a quality player. Also, there's probably not going to be anybody that wants to come to the Utah Jazz as a star player just willingly, but I'm sure there might be more opportunities next year as far as trades go down, and I think he might pounce on one, maybe two of those, just depending on where the team is and how well Taylor Hendricks and Bryce Sensabaugh developed, as well as if they do end up picking a player in this draft, how their outlook is in the short term. I think in the next 3 years, we'll really know how much this trade deadline affected the team, because again, you're going to have Larry Markkinen re-signing, you're going to have Chris Dunn re-signing, you're going to have Keontae George playing through his rookie contract, and we're really going to see who he is as a player. It's going to be the same thing with Taylor Hendricks. It's going to be the same thing with Bryce Sensabaugh. We already sent away Ochai. Walker Kessler should be solidified as a standard defensive big who's still going to be affecting shots at the rim even if he's not blocking them, and his offensive game should also round itself out. Now, if in 3 years we don't see ourselves as a fringe contender team, then we might have to scratch our heads a little bit, because OKC did it faster and better than us. They're already at the cusp. They're already contenders. They've held the first seed in the West towards the middle of the season quite a few times. Of course, they got bumped off their pivot. They're still a solid team that's going to be expected to be around for a significant amount of time to come. I believe that the Utah Jazz don't want to necessarily be caught on the same timeline as them because they are a young team, but at the same time, we're still going to have some overlapping years. And I wanted to see Lowry sniff the playoffs this year. He's never been to the playoffs before. I think it would be valuable experiences, especially in a year where you don't have expectations. If you build a team that has the expectation to make the playoffs, now the pressure is genuinely on. Not only do you have to play in the playoffs, you have to play good in the playoffs. I thought this year, because nobody expected them to be in these waters even now, being a 500, close to a 500 team, it just made sense that they were going to go ahead and try and give these guys the opportunity to just get some playoff experience. Now, admittedly, for guys that were going to end up getting traded away or weren't playing up to standard like Ochai, eventually they were going to go ahead and probably ship him away anyways. Nevertheless, it made sense to me that guys like Keontae George in his rookie season playing in some meaningful playoff games, him being able to feel that surge and understand what it's like to be in those moments would do better for him long term. Similarly with Taylor Hendricks, if he was able to get some burn then, and most importantly, Larry Markkinen, because he is the most consistent player on this team. I know Colin Sexton would love to play in the playoffs. Now, would these guys be able to steal a couple first round games? I think so, depending on their matchup, of course. I don't know if they make it out of the first round, again, depending on their matchup, but they would be able to play at the very least 4 to 7 games of just really good basketball and really get a feel for what the playoff league is looking like. And it would also do wonders for Will Hardy as a coach, because then that would immediately thrust him into a situation where he has to make tough decisions on the fly. Not to say he hasn't so far, because he naturally has, but because it would also make him evolve further as a coach, instead of being on a team where he's trying to make pieces fit. Once he finally makes pieces fit, then they all get sent other places, and now he has to work with what he has left and try and make things work. I don't think that's necessarily the fairest thing to him, but I understand it's a necessary evil at this time. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of things throughout the history of not just basketball, but humankind, where a lot of things shouldn't happen, but because they happened, it has afforded us certain luxuries later on in our timeline. And because of that, we still hate what happened in the past, but without what happened in the past, we wouldn't be where we are today. So there's a certain level of it's a love-hate relationship. And that's ultimately what you're going to have with a lot of good GMs, and Danny Ainge, in my eyes, is still a good GM. It hurt because these players were playing relatively up to standard. They had their own shortcomings, but by and large, they were bought into the system. They finally had things clicking. The team had won 19 out of 29. They were feeling themselves, and they were playing good basketball. They were fresh off 2 wins against the Bucks and the Oklahoma City Thunder in games where they were not favored to win. And honestly, if you saw the way they played them last time, you wouldn't expect them to win, with the exception of the Bucks. But the Bucks were healthier this time and still lost. It just puts things into difficult waters because you want to be a good team as soon as possible. They want to be contenders. Lowry wants to play meaningful basketball games. But at the same time, they're only going to be meaningful to a certain extent. And so the eyes of Danny Ainge and the front office currently say that they don't want to just be a middle of the road playoff team. They want to be a team that goes from being hot dog water basically to being a borderline fringe contender. And then those first round aspirations of just making it into the playoffs become, as soon as the team is good enough, everybody expects them to play in the second round maybe. And then if they play in the second round, they're going to play in some solid games. And if they win out in the second round, they can go to that next round and maybe they lose out there. But at least that team has significantly more playoff experience than had they just played 1 year middling in the Western Conference playoff picture and just playing in some playing games, making the first round and getting wiped off the face of the earth. So you wanted to get some trade value back for Fontecchio because he's valuable. So he was going to end up having to get paid by you or another team. You also had Olynyk, who was on an expiring contract, and though he was a good player, again, he's old-ish. And he doesn't really fit the timeline that you're on with the rest of your younger guys, right? Lowry's your engine, but he's 26. That's still substantially different from a guy that's in his early 30s. I was slightly surprised that Jordan Clarkson didn't get shipped out because I thought he was a surefire. THT seemed like a surefire as well, but I guess there just wasn't a market for him. And at the same time, I guess somebody had to stick around for the party. So I believe that this team will ultimately still be a play-in team. They still have that capability because the main rudders and engines are still intact. You just lost a bit of the glitz and glamour that would allow you to kind of push it over the edge. And I think that this team still is capable of doing great things. I still expect them to do great things. There's just going to be a lot more rocky patches through the rest of the season, unless they decide to go ahead and go tank mode, which I would not love. I think that this team is built to actually convey this year's pick as opposed to next year's pick. But it also could be a situation where they just don't care. And because they have basically double figure picks over the next 6 years, they're comfortable doing whatever needs to be done in the short term, and they'll live with whatever the ramifications of those are later on. I believe that ultimately this team is going to be capable of doing what needs to be done when the time comes, but that time just really isn't now. Lowry's still going to put up good numbers. Colin's still going to put up good numbers. You're going to see Keontae have more opportunities. You're really going to see Taylor Hendricks get some more opportunities. It's really tantalizing to think about. Even in the game against the Suns most recently, he didn't have a great shooting night. He was 1 of 5 from the field, 1 of 2 from 3 though. We know he can shoot the 3 ball. We know he's going to take a little bit of time to get acclimated to the NBA level, again at the G League with the SLC Stars. They do run a similar system to the Utah Jazz, though it's not the exact same. And while his numbers don't necessarily jump off the page, they're also not bad shooting splits. And so combining pretty average, league average shooting splits to go along with elite defense in my eyes, or borderline there, once he gets completely acclimated, he's going to be a monster on the defensive side of the ball. So if nothing else, you're going to be able to keep him on the floor because of that, and because he can shoot a high clip from the three-point line, or at the very least has the potential to. I believe he's the cog in the machine that they're really trying to test out and see what happens. And then Bryce Sensabaugh, once he becomes playable because of his defense, he'll end up following suit later on. This is the calmer take compared to last time when things were running high. Emotions were obviously feeling some sort of way, but we're back on track. We're more middle of the road. We are going to start looking at things from a completely objective lens, though we are fans of the game and students of the game in our own rights. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you think that you're still feeling for the players that got sent away, if you wanted them to make the playoffs this year, even understanding that they weren't going to be contenders and you were probably going to lose these guys in free agency anyways, or if you think that this was completely the right decision and we were just a little bit in and over our heads and prisoners of the moment, so to speak. It's your boy Ray Thoops. Make sure to like this video, comment, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and become a member to get the videos faster than anybody else. With that being said, as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and good morning, good evening, good night, no matter where you're on the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.